Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another one of our live video chats. Thanks for tuning in. We're joined today by Witt Boyd with the AWB Firm to talk through some of the common legal challenges that small businesses are facing during the shutdown right now. I'm going to go ahead and say we're taking questions up front. I'm just going to leave the Q&A section open. So if you've got a question for Autumn, go ahead and type it. But she's going to walk us through some of the common stuff she's hearing from some of her clients before we get to that point. So welcome, Autumn.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. As Jeremy said, I'm a lawyer. I work mostly on business and intellectual property issues, but really all I've been working on right now is COVID-19 coronavirus issues. It is coming into play in several different areas of a lot of my clients' businesses. So I want to walk through some of the things we're seeing and give you some tips and kind of some best practices on how you might adapt in your own business. So the first thing I want to say is take a deep breath. We are in uncharted waters. So there is no one right answer for anything that is happening right now. The other thing I want to tell you is because this is so uncertain and so new, we've never dealt with this before. It is legally, we're in a crazy time because in law, we rely on what are called precedents. So we like to look back in the past and see how this similar situation was handled by another company or another court, what happened in the past. We've never been here before. So if anyone tells you, we have to do this one thing and I'm going to take you to court and I'm definitely going to win, that's just not the case. We are all adapting minute by minute. Things are changing quickly. So I think what we're going to see is we're all going to have to do our best and we're all probably going to have to do some compromising. So the first thing I want to talk about, and Jeremy had asked me particularly to talk about, issues with vendors and supply chains. What I'm seeing a lot of is people wanting to cancel contracts or reschedule events, canceling events, changing the scope of contracts. So we're seeing a lot of times because either revenues have been affected. If your business is shut down, you can't pay your vendors. Or we've seen stores shut down. They can't fulfill their end of the bargain maybe. So if you are in that situation, I have a couple of tips for you. I always recommend that you start by looking at your contract. So if you're part of a supply chain, if you have a vendor contract or a client or customer contract, go ahead and pull it out, read it. I want you to look at a couple things. So the cancellation term, it might be called termination. Take a look at what that says. So back, 6 months, a year, 5 years ago, maybe 90 days ago, when none of us could have imagined that we would be in this shutdown. What did you agree? How did you agree that you were going to handle if either side needed to cancel the contract or fire the other or terminate, the services? What did you agree then? Now, you're not necessarily handcuffed by that, but it's a good starting place because if you did have to sue over, somebody not fulfilling their side of the bargain, that's going to be the starting place for the court. So I want you to just know what that says. I also want you to look at your refund policy. So you may be getting refund requests if people were prepaying for things and you maybe haven't finished out a contract. Maybe you're in the middle of a contract. So look at the refund provision. And then I want you to see, now not all contracts will have this, but see if there is an act of God, a force majeure, or an impossibility term. And all of those kind of get at the same thing, which is if something totally out of our control that we never could have imagined happens, either side can usually get out of the contract. So I want you, again, you're not necessarily going to be tied to these or handcuffed to these, but I want you to see what they say. You might even, I like to have, paper copies for things like this. Go through and circle, highlight, get out your red pen. You may have to refer back to this with several customers or several vendors. So you probably are not going to want to do this more than once unless you're a lawyer like me and you enjoy reading contracts. So print it out, have it handy. And then that's going to be your starting point probably for a negotiation and for some compromise. So what we're seeing is pretty much everybody in our economy is taking a hit on some side. If you try and enforce your contracts to the point where you're not taking any hit and the other side is the only one being damaged, that's probably going to ruin your customer or vendor relationships. And B, it's just not going to work. You're not going to be able to squeeze, we're in the point where we're not able to squeeze blood out of a turnip. So we're going to have to do the best we can. We're going to have to negotiate. So I also want you to remember that there is a human being on the other side. Even if you're negotiating with a giant corporation, there's a human being on the other side whose world has been flipped upside down. So I'm a big fan of just extending grace as much as you can, trying to keep a level head as much as you can. Are there things that you can compromise on that aren't going to hurt you much, but would really help the other person, so that neither of you is devastated? So a couple examples of this that I've been running with some of my clients. If you, let's say, are in the events industry or the wedding industry, maybe you had somebody who was going to get married, had hired you to be a caterer, and now they've canceled the wedding. So, maybe you can agree to cancel the contract. Obviously, if the wedding's not happening, it's not really fair for you to require them to pay you all of the money they were going to pay you for that catering. But maybe you could get them to agree that you can keep that deposit, and that'll kind of soften the blow for you a little bit. Or, maybe you can reschedule it for a later date. You can maybe think about offering extended payment terms to keep a customer from canceling altogether. So maybe it was a 6-month agreement and they were going to pay monthly. Maybe you can extend that to smaller payments over 12 months, or maybe you can put it on pause, give them a couple months. Hopefully we are not in this downturn forever. Fingers crossed. I'm hearing, July, we should be starting to come out of it. I'm really hopeful that that is true. So that's, we're in March now when we're recording this, May, June, July. It's just a couple months. Can you extend some grace for that couple of months? Of course, you want to protect your own business, but what can you do to keep from damaging these customer or vendor relationships forever? Because you're going to need them when things come back. You don't want to put yourself in a position that you have just burned every bridge in town, and then when your customers do come back, when the economy comes back, you're not in a position to come back into play. Another idea is reducing your scope of services and your pricing, so that maybe you can retain a client. I'm seeing this a lot with my web design or social media strategy clients. They don't want people to turn it off altogether because we're spending more time than ever on social media. So this is really the time they should be doing more. But if they can't afford that, maybe you can reduce the scope if you've got a client who's in a cash crunch. Maybe you can just postpone projects and agree to honor your current pricing if they engage you in the future. But what I want to encourage people to think about is, if you are making any of these modifications to your contracts, is to put it in writing. So we started with a contract that was in writing. If we're making any changes, we want to put those changes in writing. I don't want you to do it by email, because that can be really messy, going through a bunch of threads and trying to figure out what did we agree to. It can be a simple Word document, that you print out and sign. And you can even print it, take a picture with your phone, send it to the other person. It doesn't have to be fancy, but it's really helpful to have one place where you have all the things that you've agreed to. So if you do have to refer back to it later, you can find it. The other thing that I really want to encourage people to do is remember their company's values as they are going through making these decisions. Maybe you are a really, a shark in your business. And so you are that does coalesce with your values to draw a hard line in the sand, not give an inch. But I think most of us take a different approach to business. And, if you value relationships, if you value long-term, vendor and customer relationships, if you value, referral sources, people sending you business, all of these things. I don't ever advocate working for free or doing things that are going to damage your business beyond recovery, but the more you can be flexible and accommodating, if that aligns with your values, the better position you'll be in. The last thing I want to mention is, if you have never been in litigation, if you've never filed a lawsuit, you may think that that is your way out of this. And I will tell you, as a litigator, it is almost always more expensive, more time consuming, and a worse result than you think it is going to be. So I would just urge you to hold that out as your last resort. Now, there are cases when we don't have any other choices and litigation is our best option. But I think most of the time, especially right now, when we're all in crisis, there's a lot to be gained by seeing how much we can do to compromise and reach an agreement without resorting to litigation as our kind of right off the gun. The first thing that we do is run to court. They're mostly closed, by the way, so you're going to have a hard time getting much action there. Anyway, it's going to be a very long time before they're back up and running like normal. But no matter what you decide, I would just encourage you to be proactive with communication with your vendors, with your customers. with all of your relationships. Let them know how you're handling things, how you're adjusting, if your hours have changed, if you're not in the office, if you are having to shut down temporarily. I know a lot of my clients are parents who now have children at home all the time. And so that has kind of affected how their business is able to run or not run. So being proactive, communicating, I think, is going to be your number one ticket. I did want to mention, I have gotten some questions about whether insurance could cover some of these issues. And so I will say you may have an insurance policy that will help you, but you're going to have to read it again. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be very long and dry and boring. Contact your insurance agent if you have one. I was actually talking with a friend this weekend who is an insurance agent locally. They know all the ins and outs of the policies that they sell, so they may be able to help you. In general, what I'm seeing is business interruption insurance is not covering this. Check your policy, but most of those are only going to cover something like an actual physical disaster that is affecting your business, not an economic disaster. If you had event cancellation insurance, so a lot of my clients held conferences and in-person events, those policies may kick in. So again, just check your policy and see, and that may change. We're getting new laws every day, so some of those things may change, and maybe provide some backstops there. But I am getting a lot of questions about insurance. So that's another area where insurance is a contract, so you got to look at the contract and see what it covers. All right, Jeremy, that was kind of my initial spiel, and I'm hoping we've got some questions coming in because that's my favorite thing.
Sure, a little bit. Again, folks, if you have a question for Autumn, please feel free to go ahead and type it in the chat. I'll moderate those and ask them to her as they come in. You kind of queued me up on one of my questions there, Autumn. You mentioned courts are closed, right? So do people have to take that into account when it comes to litigation right now? It may be a while before there's any forward motion on anything. Is that true?
Yeah. So, and I can only I'm speaking to Tennessee, and I know we may have viewers in Georgia or Alabama nearby. In Tennessee, the courts are closed to in-person proceedings. The clerk's office is still open, so you can still file a complaint. You can get a case started, but you're right. You're not going to get much movement on anything. And they are open for really essential emergency type things. So, but that has been, so far what I've seen is that's been interpreted pretty narrowly. So, your business having a contract dispute is probably not going to be, the kind of emergency thing that they're dealing with are, people suffering in jail or, children at risk, these things that require a very immediate response from the courts. But your day-to-day, it's either being done by telephone. I actually have a telephone hearing this Friday. So we'll see how that goes. The courts are not used to operating this way, though. So I think they are kind of pushing everything non-essential that they can. And they're figuring this out like we are. They've got staff at home and, we're all trying to operate the best as we can in this new normal. But if you think you're going to be able to run to court and get what we call an injunction, ordering someone to do something right this minute, it is probably not going to happen.
Okay, good to know. And speaking a little bit from personal experience as someone who just had to postpone his wedding, what are you seeing when it comes to postponements? You talked about altering contracts to not just completely burn bridges with vendors. Considering how uncertain the timeline on all this is, are there particular approaches people are taking to try and postpone to some indefinite future date?
Yeah, what I'm seeing is a lot of people are postponing to the fall, but we don't really know.
Sure.
I would say, especially if it's something that involves international travel, I don't know that we're going to be out of this in fall. Maybe the U.S. will be out of this, but it's very uncertain, like you said. And so I see a lot of people either doing very small family weddings. Even now, those aren't really happening though, because a lot of states are limiting it to 2 people. Gatherings of 2 people is all that are allowed. So I'm seeing a lot of elopements. I'm seeing a lot of people, saying, let's just go ahead and get married right now, and we'll do a big party at some later date. But reach out to your vendors, talk to them, ask what they're doing. They're all trying to figure this out too, and making their own policies as they go. But But if you can say, I'd still love to use you, we still want to have a party at some point, can we just table this? If you can allow them to keep your deposit, that would be really gracious, because they are really suffering. A lot of them are going out of business. So you may not get that deposit back anyway. But yeah, it's changing minute by minute. So I think more communication is always better. Just see what they're doing, see what approach they're taking. And I will say one of my favorite wedding websites, called A Practical Wedding, has been putting out tons of resources about this. So Jeremy, you and your fiance, go and check that out. I think it's hit the event and the restaurant business, for sure hardest with all the cancellations.
Okay. And I guess along the same lines, some of what I'm seeing question-wise over here, is there specific language in there when you're altering those contracts that allows flexibility, both when we're talking about postponing an event, but also when you're talking about suppliers who may not be able to meet, who don't know whether they're going to be able to meet specific targets?
Yeah. First, the one thing I would say to start with is look at your original contract, and if it does have requirements about how you give notice, like some of the contracts I've been looking at, if there is a force majeure event, this act of God that's out of our control, some contracts do have you have to like send a letter and say very specific things. So if there's magic language or anything, you want to make sure that you're using that. With some of my clients, honestly, we're waiting a little bit to invoke that because in some states, like in Tennessee, we don't have a total shutdown yet. We don't have an order from the government saying you can't do XYZ. So some of my clients are waiting to make sure that if God forbid we have a lawsuit later, that they'll have very clear, grounds for their cancellation or for their postponement. So check your contract and see what it requires, and check what's going on in your area. For an event, I have a client in Nashville who had a big conference that they were planning, and in Nashville, they're not allowing any large gatherings. We've had that in Chattanooga just this week as well. So it is literally impossible for her to hold her event because it would be against the law. So we're putting that in the letter. We're saying on X date, the mayor of Nashville said XYZ. So just check that. And then for the circumstance that you were talking about with, I don't know when I'm going to be able to fulfill this order. I would put that in there and saying that we both agree that because of the uncertainty, you might put some best efforts language in there or something like that. Like we'll both do our best, but we can't guarantee a delivery date, and both sides acknowledge that we're not promising. The more you can put in writing that, hey, that just whatever your conversation has been, that it makes it into what you're putting in writing, is just going to help you down the line. And again, like you said, the fewer really concrete promises you can make, and that, everybody, if you're agreeing to be flexible, let's go ahead and put in writing that we're agreeing to be flexible. So if there's questions later, it's right there. I always say, if you took it to Judge Judy, would she be able to tell what you meant? Like, we want this. We want to be able to take it to somebody who has no idea what your business does, or, we don't want to include fancy language that's really specific to your industry. We want to try and make it as easy as possible for somebody to read and understand.
Okay, excellent. Some really useful advice there, I think, for a lot of folks. I'm not seeing anything else coming through on the question side at the moment, so I think we don't want to take any more.
Yeah,
sure.
The other thing, just looking at my notes that I hadn't mentioned yet, is some things that we're seeing change. Our shipping times are starting to be affected. So if that's something, if you promise a 2-day turnaround on something, you may want to, again, proactively reach out to people and say, I'm being delayed in getting my materials, or I'm, delaying, or, I'm shipping things out as quickly as I can, but it might not get to you as quickly as we thought it would. Again, just telling people about that. And if that's a key issue in your contracts, to go ahead and, again, put that in writing. We're all agreeing, because of circumstances outside of our control, that we're going to be more flexible about shipping times. I'm seeing issues with product availability or component availability. So especially if you were imported from China or any of these other hotspots, I am starting to see people having trouble with parts and pieces if they are assembling, or if they're, making things that require components from elsewhere. So again, that might be something you want to proactively reach out to your customers about. We're seeing budget slashed. I don't think that's going to be a surprise to anybody. And then we're also seeing, of course, all these trade shows where a lot of people were getting their orders are being canceled. So I'm encouraging people, and hopefully if you're watching this, you're already doing this, just to think creatively about, if you don't have a trade show to kind of get your products in front of people, what else can you do? Can you mail out samples, or can you have an online, viewing party or something? Can you have other ways that you can still get your products in front of people and still hopefully get some orders, so that when we're back up and running, people are going to need things to put in the stores when it's summer. So just kind of thinking about that, thinking about how that's going to affect your business.
Okay.
I hate to end on a down note. So let's think of something positive. I am seeing, on a positive note, I work with a lot of online businesses, and I'm seeing a lot of brick and mortar businesses looking at how they can offer their services and products online. So I think there is an opportunity there. And if anybody has questions about that, I'm happy to be a resource. My law firm kind of operates online as well.
Okay.
So we do this every day, the virtual workforce.
Absolutely. And if people do have specific things they need help with, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, our website is the best place. It's my initials. It's awbfirm.com. We have a special coronavirus page. So if you go there, you can get to it. I'll send you the link. It's just /COVID-19, awbfirm.com/COVID-19. And then we also have a podcast. So if you're a podcast listener, podcast listening is down because no one's commuting anymore. But if you enjoy podcasts, we also have a great podcast with lots of resources.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here, Autumn. We really appreciate it.
Of course.
And thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow for another one of these later in the day. Thanks.